my name is Bruce Moore. I'm the editor of Commonwealth Beacon, and I wanted to welcome you all here tonight. And for those of you that don't know anything about us, we're a nonprofit news organization, rather on the small side that covers state government. And we're a nonprofit. All our material. You want me to go over here? I'm not that important. I'm just introducing you. All our materials are free. You can get them on our website, and if you want to sign up for our newsletter, it's right over there on the table. You can sign up with your email address, and we can deliver it every day to your in-mail box. So I think it's great that this is the sort of thing we do, and we focus in on sort of complex topics that often don't get a lot of attention. And I'm grateful that so many people have turned out to talk about this subject, which, particularly in your neighbor Milton, has become a big subject of conversation. So, without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Gin Dumptious to get it going.
Thank you, Bruce. So I want to say thanks to Bruce also for the advice as I was pulling together notes on this panel. Bruce has been covering the issues over in Milton, so which sounds like there's some more developments tonight. They've got their response to the Attorney General's office, so Milton has continued to be the gift that keeps on giving on the news cycle on this. So I also want to give a thanks and shout out to Yal, our Director of Audience Engagement. She's been working behind the scenes on this and did a great job pulling it together. I also want to thank Quincy Public Library and Quincy Public Access for both the space and so thank you very much, and thank you all for being here, and thank you to the panelists as well. So I'm just going to start with a quick biographical note. I grew up in Quincy, so and I grew up on the Red Line too. My father used to take me to Harvard Square to see the chess masters play, and for me it was very much unlocking a new world. So it was, I think that sometimes gets lost in the T is also, it's an economic development tool, but it also really takes us to all sorts of different places and it gets us out of our comfort zone. So, and part of the reason test. All right. And part of the reason I wanted us to be here in Quincy tonight, this is the first of multiple conversations. So, I view this as a start. Quincy has been in many ways ahead of the curve on, not just development, but the MBTA as well. 60 years ago there was a big fight over whether to expand the MBTA down here. And it was fairly controversial at the time. It predated myself and President Kane, but it was quite, and even then some of those same issues came up. There was, I believe the Patriot Ledger reported, one of the concerns was a loss of local control when people were talking about that expansion. So I wanted to touch on that before introducing our panelists. Andrea Harris-Long, she's part of the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, and she joined it in 2021. Before that, she worked at planning organizations in Seattle and in the Charleston, South Carolina area there. So, and the MAPC works with communities. I'll let you get into that a little bit, but. And then we have Russell Holmes, who was first elected to the House in 2010. I covered his election as working for the Dorchester Reporter. So we've known each other a long time. And you represent Dorchester, Mattapan, Hyde Park, Roslindale, JP?
You got it. All sides. Yeah.
All right. That wasn't even in my notes either. That was. And Ian Kane has been the Ward 3 City Councilor since 2016. In this past January, his colleagues elected him the City Council President. He's also an entrepreneur. He co-founded Cubic Labs. And he's also being talked about as a potential challenger for Elizabeth Warren. If you want to make any announcements tonight, we can...
I've been reading those things too. Fascinating. If I'm going to make any announcements tonight, I first want to announce, well, first of all, those of you who aren't from Quincy, thanks for being here in Quincy. and we'd love to welcome you back to 2 other community events that we host. We host an event called Porch Fest, which takes place this year on June 29th, 2024, which is a Saturday. It's an outdoor block party meets music festival. We hope to have over 100 performers at over 80 locations across the city. And then through Cubic Labs, we host an event in Quincy called Boston Blockchain Week. So for those that aren't familiar with the space, we invite you to come participate in that, and that will be September 11 to 13 in Quincy Center in Kilroy Square. Thanks, Ken.
It's very smooth. That was good. I like that. And I apologize for my voice.
Still didn't answer the question. Get all of that.
In that case, let me also recognize my colleagues in government who are here tonight. I've got my colleague from the City Council at Large, Scott Campbell, and we also have Norfolk County Sheriff, Mr. Patrick McDermott.
Thank you for doing it, and thank you for being here. And I want to also apologize for my voice. As any parent of a toddler will sympathize, I'm recovering from a cold, so that's why my voice sounds the way it does. Andrea, can you set us up for about the MBTA Communities Law and kind of what it is? There's a lot of talk about exactly what it does, but what does it do?
Yeah, thanks. And good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming out tonight and joining us. So as again mentioned, I'm a planner by trade, so I really love talking about planning things, and I'll try not to get too excited about all the topics tonight. But as you all know, the greater Boston area, we have a housing crisis. Housing is unaffordable. People are leaving because they can't afford to stay here. The people who are able to stay here maybe are paying way too much and can't do other things that they need to do to live a quality of life that they want. And so the legislature, recognized that and passed this law in 2021, in the MBTA Communities Law. And what it says is the 177 communities that are served by the MBTA they have to do some work on their zoning. And we know that in certain places, not all different housing types are allowed. Zoning can be kind of restrictive. Some places only allow single-family homes or maybe different scales of multifamily, but not really a good range of housing types. And so what this state law does is says, all of these 177 communities need to adopt a new zoning district or make some revisions to their existing zoning to allow for multifamily. And it has some kind of wonky guidelines to go with it. There has to be a minimum density of 15 units per acre, which can actually be accomplished in like 2 to 3 story buildings. So I think that that's one of the misconceptions, is that this is kind of only for those high-rise multifamily developments, but actually multifamily is defined as anything 3 units or more. So it's really up to a community to really craft what that zoning looks like. The other interesting thing that planners really like about this law is that there are deadlines attached to it. I know that's tough for cities and towns because it required a lot of quick action to really dig into zoning, but the state law says by 2022, the rapid transit communities, which are those along the subway lines, needed to enact their zoning and be in compliance. And then in 2023, 2024, this year, all of the commuter rail communities have to do some zoning work. And then by 2025, the adjacent small towns, those kind of on the fringes that don't necessarily have subway or commuter rail stops, but they still are in the service area, they have to do work on their zoning. So it means that over the next 3 years, we can actually start to address this housing crisis by unlocking one barrier to housing production, which is zoning. Zoning doesn't build houses. It's not a production mandate. So this is really just focusing on the land use regulations and making sure that cities and towns are loosening up their zoning a bit more to allow for just different housing types. So that's kind of a high-level overview. I'm sure we'll get more into the weeds of it, but hopefully that's helpful.
And Rep. Holmes, so you're a member of the legislature, and when the legislature voted on MBTA Communities Law, it was actually part of a larger bill, and that's been used as kind of a sometimes saying like, oh well, it was actually kind of like shuttled in and as part of something else. What can you tell us a little bit about the atmosphere of when that passed, and did lawmakers know what they were voting on?
Sure. So I find it interesting that many people say often that we pile all these things into our economic development bills and none of us know what's going on. What I can tell you is that each one of us get to the building and we have our own priorities. This was, so some of us could be fighting for mass growth capital money, and I'm going to make sure time the economic development bill comes out, is that there? Or someone might be looking for this change, And we all understand that for these bills to pass, there's a little give and take. And I was actually informed that this was going to happen, and it was like other members of the Black Latino Caucus were like, this is a cool thing to do. Many of us inside of the cities, because the Black Latino Caucus is mainly Lawrence, Springfield, Boston, Holyoke cities, we feel like we have been the folks who have been carrying much of the burden for housing and for all of our regions, in particular, much of the burden for affordable housing. So when you say, what's the climate, we didn't think it went far enough, many of us. We're like, okay, we're gonna put these zones in, but what about, you can go and you can build these multifamilies, but a lot of it could just be market. We were looking for, trying to make sure we can also build affordable units in these multifamilies as well. But, so the climate was, we in Massachusetts, of course, want to be the best in the world and the best in the country, and we are going to continue to do everything we can to spur economic development. So this was just one of those things. Housing is just part of the economic development that came with all of the other things that were inside the bill. So I know that's the tone, that we don't know what we're doing. We get in the middle of the night, none of us know what we're voting on. I'm just going to say right now that's a lie. Sure, there are many things in these outside sections that we get a summary of and hear about, but then our challenges or our priorities become the things that are priority to us. And there are, 200 members, and each one of those members have things that we know are important. And in the end, the goal is to try to get these things across the finish line, and we did. My only other comment was about climate, was that when the MMA sent their letter, which was a pretty strong letter, to say, hey, Charlie, you shouldn't sign this, you should veto this, I was actually surprised that he didn't veto it. So, because of the fact that I think many of the things they put in their letter to the governor have become true, right? So it's all about whether or not this could be local control, whether or not we were trying to exact some type of hard hammer. And the answer was yes, we were. And I will end by just saying again, this is easy to me compared to what I said to you earlier today. I think of the folks who were in the Mass legislature and more than 100 years ago who said, we're going to go out and we're going to create the Quabbin Reservoir and flood 4 towns and move 4 towns and make sure that we had enough water for the Boston metro area. That was a hard decision. And that was one that we made a decision, or they made a decision about what they thought was best for the Commonwealth. And so did we. And so we need more housing. This is not enough. I would have gone further with affordable housing, and that's kind of the climate that I can say was happening amongst me and other members of the Black Latino Caucus.
Say MMA, you mean Mass Municipal Association?
Of course.
Yeah.
Yep, sorry.
So, no, I just wanted to, and one more question before I turn to President Kane. What's the feedback you're getting from colleagues and people, you run into now? I know state reps are some of the most accessible folks,
We try to be.
So what are you hearing from both fellow members across the region and both here and then from voters? What do they say?
I hear more from you guys in the press than I do from my colleagues, right? So we made a decision. I think we have made a decision that we think this is what's best for the Commonwealth. There are obviously some folks who are unhappy. You've seen some of my colleagues who have put in bills to try to change it, and we, of course, are still tweaking it. You've mentioned Milton more than once, so clearly some of the colleagues in Milton, part of that problem is they felt like it shouldn't be a rapid transit neighborhood. It should have been deemed something else. But as a person who grew up across the water from Milton, I've always felt like I was attached to the Red Line, just like I said to Ian. I mean, sure, you get on the trolley, you go to the Ashmont, and you go down the Red Line, but all of that feels like all one line. So they were trying to find a little carve-out to say that they shouldn't do it. But I'm thankful that the Attorney General lives actually closer to Central Ave. She goes down her street, take a left, take a right. She's in Milton. So I'm happy she understands this debate and argument very well, and I'm happy she did the right thing by saying, we expect all of our towns and cities to do exactly what we ask, and some of them may not be happy with that, but we're trying our best to solve a problem that is one that if we don't solve, we'll continue to have many, many, many of these young folks leaving this Commonwealth.
President Kane, I want to talk about Quincy. You've been on the city council for a decade, almost a decade, and so you've seen kind of development boom that was happening even before the MBT Communities Law came into play. So you know, what's been happening in Quincy, and then looking ahead, what's going to happen now that there is this MBTA law?
So it's interesting trying to hear the juxtaposition between the cities and towns that have not been so favorable and welcoming to this Communities Act, because Quincy went through its own planning process of its own. We sought growth. So, you know, we were going through planning urban renewal districts, which we've done in the downtown area. We just planned an urban renewal district around Wollaston T Station. When I first joined the council, when I was first elected in 2015, we went through a series of discussions around planning transit-oriented districts around 3 of our T stations out of the 4. And at that time, I had a problem with, we were going to overlay each of the 3 other MBTA districts outside of Quincy Center with the same zoning overlay. And the problem that I had was that all 3 of those T stations represent very different characteristic neighborhoods. And so, you know, looking at a sort of more macro implementation of a Communities Act that looks at 177, I would probably take the same perspective, which is there's not a one size fits all. I understand the needs and the demands and the supply constraints, which Quincy has been, you know, very well absorbing. But there are cities and towns that certainly want that type of growth, and there are cities and towns that absolutely do not. And personally, I think that's within their rights to have a problem with, to seek amendments or resolutions to. When we did have to fall into compliance with the Communities Act, similarly, if we're trying to design an improvement of housing around transit-oriented districts, the biggest problem that we have is that our transit is broken. So I don't know why we're trying to put thousands more units in places around, you know, T stations that don't operate efficiently and are unpredictable. So, you know, to me, there was sort of a chicken and egg problem of, well, why don't we fix the transit system before we start putting housing around the places that you'd like to co-locate people in transit that don't currently mix and work together?
All right, so I can't even fix that, I'll catch him out, sorry.
Yeah.
We have hired who we think is a great person to run transit. We didn't. The role now is not one that is more political, which is what it had been for a long, long time. We went and got a transit expert, and we need to get the people off the roads. We need to, you know, this chicken or egg. No, I need to have a great transit system. We didn't just go and pass $1 billion for transit and education for us to believe that we're not going to have good transit. To develop and build these buildings is going to take years. I won't build, you might, you know, change the zone, but by the time that building is built, it's 5-10 years from now. My transit will be better. And we're gonna continue to demand that Ing and his whole team makes transit better. Like the decision for me to do it also with an equitable lens, that now I can get on the Mattapan Square on the trolley, and I don't get a slow zone until I get to JFK. And to have it so that we're going to eliminate all slow zones by the end of this year is the first good step. And so we have faith that we have the resources and really the dedication to make sure we get our transit better. And housing is years away, and I want folks off these single-use cars coming right through Mattapan Square. Like I stand in the middle, down at the end of my street, and I see all these folks coming through my neighborhood in one person in a vehicle. Because I say, go get on 93. Why are you riding right up Blue Avenue? Go get off my road.
You're essentially supporting my point. Right?
I'm just saying, go get on the train. Don't be getting in the car.
But it's not that simple. So things have changed since COVID.
Yeah,
right?
people have decided they like being in the car by themselves. That's what they've decided.
Or they've decided that time is more valuable to them, and they.
I disagree.
Well, I'm watching
no
it from my perspective. We've got issues here in the state where people don't have reliable transit. They don't have to go to work as often as they do, so they, can pick and choose their schedules if they are so fortunate to do that. And so they're getting in cars, they're driving into town, they're even getting into Ubers, which are faster than using public transit.
Which is making it worse.
Correct, which is making it worse. So again, the problem is the transit doesn't work, and that's not a problem of this new general manager of the T. This is an existing problem. This is a decades-old problem. But to come in and say, we need to dramatically increased by tens of thousands of units by transit-oriented districts that currently don't serve its ultimate use with transit is just a tough thing to swallow.
Yeah, so this is a debate we're going to have between local and state. Our job is to try our best to make it so that we make statewide decisions for 177 people. I see this debate happening at the federal level. Obviously, Texas think they should leave and say that the feds aren't doing the job they need to do, so they're going to go out and try to do it. We see it happening in my city too. Like, I have 77 units trying to build at Savin Hill, at a train station, and folks are saying, why are you building it? And literally all you do is walk out the train station and walk out of your home and go down to the train station and say, oh, well, you know, the train doesn't run. No, I don't think it's just the train's not running. I think COVID has changed, like you said, people's approach and ideas around work and the like. And I think it's also made people very selfish. People got into these corners. They think about themselves only. They don't think about, there are rich people who ride transit in New York, rich. Don't matter how poor you are, and their transit's not much better than ours. But it's just a culture that, I know, sorry. You got two politicians going at each other. You shouldn't have let us get into this. All right, I'll stop, but
I
Ask me a
appreciate the passion for sure, but the ultimate that we agree on is that there's a bigger problem here, and it's systemic. And yes, people might be selfish, but there's no legislation that can enforce a person being selfish and not use a car at this point in
So
time.
here's what I have to make a decision.
Yeah.
I have to make a decision that says I have to choose. And I make the choice, because most people are trying to figure out their car and where the car is going to park and how many people they're going to have. The person who already has the car, I have to make a choice. Am I going to choose to create a place for someone to live, or to make sure I protect someone's parking spot for someone who already has a place to live? And that's what this is becoming. I choose to give someone a place to live over someone who already has a place to live to have a parking spot. And that's a decision I'm making as we continue to build all over this Commonwealth and all over this city and all over the state. I need to say we need to have a lot more housing, and it can't be that you say, hey, our transit isn't good, and so I'm not going to build any housing. I hear you loud and clear.
No, that was not what I said. So there's a difference. I said there's a chicken and egg, and I said one, the problem originally is the transit, right? And then we're increasing stock around transit, and it does not work. And therefore, so if you've got 12,000 more units that we're supposed to absorb in Quincy Adams T Station in a particular area, right? What does that do to that neighborhood? People are going to come with cars anyway. The T still doesn't work. You know, how are you absorbing that capacity over time?
And so I hear also people say, well, what about our schools? Well, I'm saying we don't say that about Boston. When Boston absorbs all of the students that come, it's almost like when you read The Color of Law, it is clear that these things are intentional. So from my perspective, we have had 100 years, decades of law that have made it so these communities, many of them don't want more housing. It is intentional. They wanted these, I'm going to create these laws that make it so that you have a very large lot, at least 1 acre and all the other stuff to keep other people out. I believe it's intentional. And it was through law. And so we're coming back with law to try to change that. And that's basically how I see it. And not how everyone in the legislature sees it, but we've only had 2 folks who misbehaved at this point, right? Milton and Holden. Everyone else out of 177 towns and cities have said, we're going to try our best to be in alignment. So my thought is, let's not overreact. You have 2 people who are now the Attorney General and the Governor and the legislature. We're going to do what we say we're going to do. We're going to withdraw money, and we're going to, once you don't get MassWorks money, I'm telling you, that makes a very, very big difference. And we'll see how the other cities and towns respond.
John Keller taught me that try to stay out of a debate when it's happening. So I did my best there. No, that was good. I did want to touch on kind of the shift in what people are seeing both with this and with what Mayor Wu is trying to do in Boston with the change in zoning is it's very much a change in local control. It's a change of what people are used to, right? That people are used to showing up at a meeting, complaining about a development, and the developer then coming back and saying, okay, well, I'll do like 80 units instead of 90 or whatever, and then so on and so forth. So, Andrew, I wanted to ask, what kind of trends are you seeing in terms of this shift in how people are talking about zoning and development?
Yeah. So I think it's important to note that zoning amendments happen all the time without a state law being required. A lot of the communities that we work with, we have 101 cities and towns in our region, and what we usually do before the state law kind of changed the game and had us focusing more on implementing 3A is we would help communities do downtown zoning updates or mixed-use districts because they had a business corridor, but they knew that the zoning wasn't really supporting that business corridor to grow. And so zoning amendments happen all the time. And I think your question about local control is really interesting because to me, that's where you can shift and actually have the local control be in crafting your zoning, not on an individual development basis. Because ideally, if you have good zoning, you don't need to have that really long development review process. You can have your zoning really be shaping what kind of development you want to see in your community. I think it's important to note that the state law does require flexibility. The requirement is for by right, but that doesn't mean that you can't require site plan review, which can really help shape what a site looks like and how buildings interact with the neighborhood around it. You can have design guidelines, you can have height requirements, you can have setback requirements, all of those things that you naturally think about whenever you're writing zoning and amending zoning over time, you can still do. So the state, I think, did a smart thing, and by saying you have to have a minimum density of 15 units per acre, some communities say that's great. Others are going to want to have 30 units per acre or 40 units per acre. It's up to them. You can also, have one district centered around your train station if you are doing a transit-oriented approach. I think that you all have already been doing the things that 3A is trying to accomplish here in Quincy, but you can also spread it out. So maybe you have a commuter rail station, you can do half of your district around that, but you also have a neighborhood that you want to have more investment and growth there, and you're going to put the rest of your new zoning in that area, or you'll tweak some of the zoning that you already have. So I think that there's still local control, but helping to think about where that local control should actually be best used. And if you're doing zoning amendments and zoning work and tweaks in the best way, you're involving the community in that process so that you don't have to get bogged down and having planning board and like individual discretionary review processes be where that engagement is happening. Because I think that if you do that step back, you can actually have more equitable engagement and involve people more. I think if you think about who is engaging in planning board meetings on that site-specific development review process, it's probably not actually that much local control other than a handful of people who go to those meetings and have control.
And President Kane, you've been at those meetings, right? And you hear from constituents when they're unhappy with a development. What's your take on this? In some people's view, it's a loss of local control.
I will just continue probably the same narrative that I started from the beginning. It is. I appreciate the work of your organization and the work of the legislature. I'm not a full adherent to central planning, right? Quincy has its very own unique identity. It wants to maintain and protect or have more control over its own destiny,
That's right. It's potential.
Well, again, you're coming from a different place, and I understand the place that you're coming from and the message that you're trying to send. I'm not
trying to send a message. You're sending a message. It's protection.
Well, every time I speak, you keep speaking over me, so you're trying to send a message.
No, I'm hearing you, and it's about local control, and I'm saying that
And we don't have to agree.
you're local. I got it.
Yeah, well, this is my job, right?
But protect.
Yeah.
That's the word you use, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
One
to
person
protect the
speaking
integrity
at a time,
of the municipality. Correct. Yeah, that's our role, right? You have a different job. You're doing what you need to do. As a city councilor, in ward matters, I represent a district of Quincy. Most of that district is residential A, maybe residential B. People want to maintain those neighborhoods. Those are the only neighborhoods that are left like it, right? People want to live in single-family homes. The cost of living right now for people, labor markets aren't keeping up with cost of living right now, right? People want to buy into this concept of an American dream still, and it's different from, living in an apartment complex somewhere. So people that live in these, and there's no transitional housing either available. So from young people to older people, there's nowhere to go. So I get the need to, fix our housing issues, to put, concepts in different places, but at the end of the day, I'm still doing my job.
Can I speak?
Yeah, yes.
I'm not going
Please.
to cut you again. I didn't mean to be rude. That's not what I was trying to do. Couple things. in the city of Boston, we have thousands of zoning meetings and thousands of these folks trying to tell people what to do in their houses. And so my understanding is in New York, because many things are as of right, they have maybe 20, I think, is the number, some ridiculous low number for having to go to do a zoning board because of the fact that they've essentially planned out the city and people go and build as of right. And so when you ask the question again about what the mayor is doing, are we going to go from thousands to 20? No, we might go from thousands to a couple hundred. But the much of the cost of building in this Commonwealth, in this region, is because I'm going through 15 of these community meetings, right? And so you have to have the lawyer there, you have to have the architect there, you have to have the person who's building, and all of that stuff just adds more and more cost to building the unit. And so then folks will show up and say, well, why can't I have the exact same unit? Why can't they build a house that I live in? Why am I building this? Back to an example, 150 Center Street. Why can't they build this house like mine? Why do they have to build this big monstrosity, right? Protect, the neighborhood. We want the same integrity. And then you go and you Google, you say on Suffolk Deeds, well, how much did this person pay for their house? Oh, that person bought that house 30 years ago and they paid $275,000 for it, right? And then you say, well, what is this little small unit that you don't want to have that's, that you think is a box? How much does it cost for me to build this little small unit? Oh, $650,000. So yeah, you want me to go build something that you paid for $275,000 that now you can sell for $1 million. I can't build that. I can't build something that's $74 million. And they say, well, let's protect our, our same look, our own community. Let's protect this community. And it's all about, from my perspective, NIMBYism, and all about saying, we have this neighborhood. It is nice and quiet, and we don't want other people in it. And I don't hear people who don't have a place to live fighting against this. The people who I hear fighting against this are all the folks who already have a place to live. I'm trying to find something. I'm trying to get your kid out of your house so they can have a place to live too, so you're not crowded into your house trying to get them a place to live as well. So it is just all of these layers and culture of, literally, I've been in meetings and people bring up a design and they say, okay, I'm going to build on this lot. And people are telling people where to put their bathrooms. Oh, I don't want the bathroom over here. I want it over here. Oh, the stairs should be over here. I should have them over here. And those are the type of conversations people are having about their house, their building, that nobody over here, you're not paying for a single dime of this house, but you want to tell me where to put every room in my house. And that's the culture we've allowed to have happen, where people are that much into my business, and they are never going to ever go in that house because I'm not going to let you in my house because I didn't like you through the process anyway. You're not coming to my house because you're a jerk, right? But now you're going to come over here and you're going to tell me where to put my rooms. Now, it's just,
But isn't that
I'm 14 years into this, and I've seen it many, many, many times. Maybe there's a medium where someplace in the middle where we don't get to like New York where you build as of right, but we have to bring this cost down. This cost is enormous for all these community meetings.
Did you want to respond?
No, it's okay.
So I did want to touch on something that Commonwealth ran an op-ed recently from Luke Schuster, and the thrust of his op-ed was that either side, the proponents of MBTA communities law and the opponents are overselling what it would do, and this can be a question for all three of you. Do you feel it's kind of overblown in terms of what it can do and what it the scary parts that some people are saying?
Maybe I can start with just maybe get a word in. Just kidding. I think of it as a really good first step. I think that it's not going to produce all of the housing that we need because zoning doesn't build housing, but I think that it's one step that's needed to break down one significant barrier to production within our region. And so I think that, yes, it's not going to produce the thousands of units that are required under the zoned unit capacity, the very wonky measure of how you're complying. But I think that it's better than nothing. And if we didn't have this, then where would we be? What would we be doing to take that first step into addressing the housing crisis and removing this major regulatory barrier that is preventing us from building anything other than single-family homes in a lot of places, or those really expensive multifamily 5 or 6 stories that are still not necessarily providing affordable housing, because not everyone has inclusionary zoning that would require affordable housing. So I think it's a good first step. I don't think it's going to fix everything, but nothing ever does. You always have to kind of layer different strategies, and this is one important strategy.
President Kane, is it overblown?
Yeah, I think there's always a case of things being overblown in any politics, right? And there's sometimes a vocal minority that might carry a message further about a particular issue. And again, a lot of the reactions from many of the cities and towns, I mean, 177th, a lot of them have been reactionary, certainly, but not without merit, right? Every cause for concern deserves some examination. And, I think in that article, or maybe it was another one, there are other concerns that people have about absorbing infrastructure costs, right? Or the infrastructure existing being able to handle the new supply coming in. And those are real concerns, because where's that money coming from? And so, yes, there are grant programs through the state that provide a small fraction of the total cost of what would be needed to adequately, amend water, sewer, et cetera, roadway work after that. But it's not gonna really move the needle at the end of the day. So, but yeah, I think there's always the loudest voices sometimes carry the message the furthest, when it's not necessarily an accurate representation of true beliefs.
So, yes, and I try my best not to create spaces for these loud people to come and say everything they got to say. As I try my best to pass laws, right? So I get in a room, if there are 10 people in the room, I'm just trying to get 6 or 7 of us to agree. Because I believe there are going to be, if there are 10 people, there are going to be 2 or 3 on each extreme that I'm never going to make happy. Because they're never going to be happy no matter what I do. So I don't even try to make them happy. And so I'm just trying to get into a conversation that says, is there 7 of us who can agree that we can move forward on something that makes sense? And then the thing that's so great about the 3 noisy people is that they're going to try their best to come in and kill the projects, right? So they're going to come in and say, the world's going to end. This is the worst thing in the world. This is a new big deal. They're going to say whatever they're going to say. And what I try my best to do is to just listen to them, because sometimes they give you a nugget. They give you a real problem, not the emotional problem. They actually give you something that actually needs to be fixed. And then most times, like I can think of an example, the bridge next to Forest Hills. You guys know where Forest Hills is in Boston. We took down that bridge, and it's like the world's going to end if we take down this bridge. And then, you get 6 or 7 people to now get it on the roadway, and then you get all of these folks coming in and they complain, but you get the nuggets. And then by the time you get there and you've made all of the tweaks to the changes that they had asked for, you actually have a very good project. And it's excellent. And so now you go build this project after all the crazies have said what they had to say, wearing shirts, standing on the bridge, wearing signs and all the other stuff. They've done all of that stuff, but then they give you a very good project at the end. And now here we are, years later, you drive through there, people don't even know there was ever a bridge. They say, and then I love it how then they're like, oh, who would ever have kept the bridge? You're the one who was crazy enough to demand that we should keep the bridge. And the same thing's going to happen here. We're going to continue to tweak this law to get it where you're right, Ian, it is a blunt tool, but we'll tweak it. We'll get it better. We'll try our best to listen to the 177 people, but it does head us towards doing something I think has been intentional. I'm going to say it again. It has been intentional to keep people. You can't keep black people out of neighborhoods now legally. So one of the ways you try, or poor people, however you want to categorize who you're trying to keep out, you can't do that legally now, but you absolutely can do it by making it so that you have all these zoning codes and all these zoning restrictions where it just becomes about an economic barrier. And much of this has been economic barriers that we're trying to knock down at the same time. And it was legal. So now we're trying to make it legal so that we can try our best to put more diverse people. So again, I would say we didn't go far enough, because I would have banged, hey, we need a lot more affordability in all of these units at the same time.
So on the subject of tweaking, I want to talk about the state regs for a little bit, because there's the law, and then there's what the Housing and Economic Development, Housing and Livable Communities Secretariat put forward. Andrea, can you talk a little bit about the regs, and then Rep. Holmes and President Kane? Maybe you could talk about what would you change if you had the power of Ed Augustus?
Yeah, so the guidelines are somewhat specific in that you have to have a minimum land area, 50 acres in size. I already mentioned the density requirement, 15 units per acre is a minimum. There are some other regulations around what your zoned unit capacity is. That was kind of done in a way to look at how many housing units you have today and then have it be proportional so that it's not, if you have 10,000 units today, you have to have 10,000 of zoned unit capacity. They tried to make it reasonable in that way. So you can actually go online and kind of look at every community and what those requirements are. And then it had some other specific things that get very in the weeds. About like how much of the land area needs to be by your transit station area or your commuter rail stop. If you don't have either of those things, then you do have flexibility to put it wherever it makes sense in your community. I think it's really important to note that most of the communities in the 177 area have been doing planning work. They have long-range plans like a comprehensive plan or a master plan, or they've done neighborhood planning. So ideally, those are informing how they're working on their zoning because the guidelines do allow you to do that different customization of the zoning. So the guidelines set that stage, but then there is a lot of flexibility for communities to impact how those guidelines play out locally.
So, President King, what would, if you had the regulatory power of Secretary Ed Augustus, what would you tweak or what would you change about the regs that are out there right now?
That's an interesting question. I, don't have a magic wand. I don't have those regulatory powers. And I just keep coming back to kind of, it seems like from what was a political process, right? And when it happened, this happened in the Baker administration, right? And now Governor Healey's had to deal with sort of the outfall of this bill. So, I always think that especially when it comes to local issues like housing, which everything becomes local at the end of the day, but just more public engagement, right? There should have been more public engagement to enfranchise people that they were a participatory part of the growth of their city or town, right? And then it wouldn't be such a fear-based discussion about we're dropping in all this and we're gonna it's a hammer and it's a mandate from on high. That doesn't play. If you want to welcome progress and change, I think it needs to be if you said it's going to take a long time, then why don't we roll it out a little slower so that it's palatable instead of this fight? Because now in places like Quincy, where we're doing our job, we're absorbing the capacity, we've been doing it anyway without the need for a mandate, we should be rewarded for the things that we're doing as opposed to Milton being punished for what they're not. And I think that's a better way to look at it.
Rep. Holmes.
Speaker of the House is from Quincy, so it's not surprising to me that this was something that obviously you guys were doing already. I'm going to just say it this way. Right now we're debating a gun bill, one that here in this legislature that we didn't want to change our gun laws. We believe that we are the safest state in the country from a gun death perspective for a reason, and that is because we have some of the most strict gun laws there are. However, when the Supreme Court says to us 6-3, or the court that we're not agreeable to, they say, hey, you have to change it because your gun laws are too strict. Guess what we have to do? We have to change them. That is, as you say, on high. As the feds telling the state what we need to do, the state is going to then say to the cities what we think you need to do. And that is just the government we live in. This is called a democracy. And so we're going to make these gun law changes. We're going to tweak it to make sure that we adhere to what the Supreme Court has said. We're going to throw in our own stuff too. Like we're going to get rid of these switches and going to make sure we do something about ghost guns, but we're going to adhere. And so if I was the secretary, I would be doing exactly what I think he's going to do, go around the Commonwealth, hear where we can make this thing better, just like we're saying we can make the gun bill better with the switches and getting rid of switches and getting rid of ghost guns, but we're going to adhere to the law. And I'm asking all the cities and towns to do the same thing. Yes, it came on high. Change is going to happen, accepted. And let's try our best to just make sure that we can do things that are amenable to your community. We're not, the governor, the legislature, the attorney general, the last thing we want to do is to be fighting with towns and cities. That's not really the goal. It really isn't. It's just that we just felt like most of these people would do anything if we didn't do something. And that's where we are.
So I did want to leave some time for audience questions. But I wanted to also touch on climate change, and should the state take into account how climate change is going to impact not all MBTA communities, but some of them over the next 30 years. A subset will be facing shrinking geographic footprints. I don't think HouseNet is going to be around in 40 or 50 years. So should the state be taking climate change into account? And Andrea, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I think that the state is. I think that the state's doing a lot of really good work on climate resiliency, climate adaptation. I think kind of building on the last question into this, I think that it's important that all communities are doing their fair share for housing. That's the importance of this law, right? That we all need to be doing something to advance our housing goals. And some communities can do that differently. I think that coastal communities will have to be a little bit more creative in how they're addressing their housing needs. I think that as we were talking, shorelines are shrinking, land is going away, being ceded back to the ocean. That just means that we have to be smarter with how we use that land, and that's where zoning really is intended to help you be smart about how you're growing, being smart about how you're using the precious resource that you do have. And multifamily, multi-unit developments are more efficient. You get, more buildings if you can have a couple stories rather than having a single-family home on an acre lot. That's not a very efficient use of land. So I think that it is more challenging, and I think that new development does offer climate benefits because newer buildings are going to be more energy efficient. You have an opportunity to raise them if you're in a flood area. You also have an opportunity to actually help with flooding because stormwater can be better managed with new developments. So there are trade-offs, but it does take more work and more planning on the environmental side to complement the housing work.
President Kay?
I can't say it any better than Andrea, but I think we're fortunate that HouseNet is not a transit-oriented district. Yeah.
Rev Holmes?
So, yes, I think about some of the things we've done in Boston. We just built thousands and thousands of units in the seaport, and we're going to run into a problem that they're going to come in and ask us to put up a barrier wall. Yeah. And at some point, you're going to have all these rich people who built all these houses in places that they probably shouldn't have. If you see already the aquariums flooding, what do you think is about to happen in some of the most other expensive places? And the first thing they're going to ask us for is a barrier wall. Come out here and spend $100 million to protect our home. So that's a great question, though, again, because of the fact that some of the law talks about how many acreages and things should be used. And so that, again, is one of the other tweaks that we need to make sure that we should do. And I'll be brief, too, because I do want to see what folks in the audience have to ask me as well.
All right. Yeah, sure. If anybody has questions, raise their hands.
Okay, this is on. Gonna run over here. Pardon. Okay, audience runner.
Hi there. My name is Jules, lifelong Quincy resident for coming up to 30 years now. And my favorite joke is that I would love someday to move out and perhaps move to Florida, Massachusetts, which is next to North Adams and has no bus, and you'd have to walk down the Greylock Range, of it to get to anything anywhere. So because that's the only place that's affordable to me. I make $50K a year, and I still can't move out of my original home with my parents. So this is of importance to me as someone who fears for his life driving. I would much rather not drive. I have my license. I don't drive if I can will it. So the T has been lifeblood to me. There is, and like I'm building this up, I'm building my, ethos, pathos, whatever you want to call it. But I think it's very important, like if I set myself back and just look at the situation and take the polemics, take the behavioral stuff, and cut right through it. So we're trying to handle all of these priorities. We're trying to either increase our capacity for transiting people or moving around people, or get them to decrease their distance or their time spent or whatever the case is, and make sure that they have house, like, so many needs going on at the same time. Like, the only real answer that we have is if we're able to densify and just mix the heck out of the zoning in some strategy. Now, where that happens is, well, I mean, again, you come into the heat, I guess, of it with people, but like, there has to be a case made that things cannot remain the same. So, because everything else is changing and they're changing for the worst. So where do we go in terms of instilling that and not being fatalistic? Because in a decade from now, I want to be able to say that, hey, I live in a house that is relatively close to where I grew up, and have a family.
I don't think you're alone in that. So who wants to take a crack at that?
I appreciate your setup. I was thinking I wanted to ask a question to my colleague, if you happen to have, data probably. And maybe you do, from the studies that came out of if this was an economic, part of an economic development package, is, with the increase in housing production, how much will it actually reduce rents?
So there's no answer to how much rents. That's still a market. As you're better at this, at
No,
all that technology than
right,
I will ever be with all the Bitcoin and things. But what's your name? Ethan? I'm sorry. What's your name? Jules? You are who I'm trying to solve the problem for. You are. You're in your family's home. You want to be close to transit. You want it to be affordable. You are exactly who we're trying to solve this for, and you have put them together. We believe you should stay in your neighborhood. Like, many folks in my neighborhood have moved out to Randolph, Stoughton, and Brockton, because that's the only place they can afford, because we have basically kicked them out of our city. And once you get out of the city, you're not coming back. Like, people say, I'm going to move out, and then I'll be able to afford to come back. No, once you get out of here and you bought that house, you're not going to be able to get back. And so I firmly believe that we should build, and that's what I was saying, as much affordable housing near transit. That's the decision we have made in the legislature, that we believe housing should be concentrated near our transits, and we should be building as much affordable housing near our transit as possible. And that is really, you're saying, what's the juxtaposition? That is the point of the law. Put as much of it as we can near our transit. And I'll also say, I graduated from BU, and the president of BU invites all of us who in the legislature who are BU alums to the little private party every year after the graduation. 2 years ago, I get there, and there was someone who had graduated from BU before, and he and they were from San Francisco, and they were coming up. The one thing they said to me is, "Oh, well, we were here when we graduated 30 years ago." You know what they said? They said, "This is the best transit system I've ever seen." And I said, "Yeah, of course it is. That's how great it is." We take for granted, because we say many times, to your point about Florida, I can leave my house. I got the 21, the 31, the 28, the 29, the orange line, the red line, the trolley, Keolis. I can get to all those things like in a 10-minute walk. We take for granted in many of these, Quincy, Boston, this rapid transit. Even though it doesn't run exactly the way we want, we are spoiled. And we just think it's supposed to always be perfect, even though it's 100 years old. We're doing our best to make it better.
I think, and since we're coming up on time, that'll probably be the last one, unless.
Yeah. Okay. My name's Joe. Thank you. I appreciate the fierce conversation that's going on up there. I think it's great to see the open dialogue between you all. And I have kind of two questions, and one of them you may not be able to answer. I've been trying to figure out why Avon was excluded from the MBTA Communities Act, and maybe this isn't the forum for that, but it's just odd that all of the communities around it are MBTA communities in one shape or form, but Avon was excluded. I haven't found anybody who knows why, and maybe one of you knows. And then it's also interesting because we talk about Boston. Boston's exempt from the MBTA Communities Act. And for instance, in Mattapan, there was a recent improvement to the Purple Line. And I'm just surprised there wasn't some sort of decision to maybe include some sort of overlay district in that particular area, given that there's been a significant amount of infrastructure improvement in the city.
I am trying to get as many houses on that commuter rail line as I possibly can. So I try my best to pass a law that says let's get as much housing along. The other folks didn't agree. You're going to get another improvement on that, what you call Purple Line and Fairmont Line. I don't know if I'm supposed to announce it yet, but I'm going to say it. You're going to go from 45 minutes in the morning to half an hour. And then we're looking to make sure that we also get that line electrified by 2027 because of the fact that, again, to Ian's point, which one comes first, the chicken or the egg? I'm going to do all I can to get as much public money on that line, to get reliable transit on that line. That runs at 95% reliability. That thing runs right on time each day. And in regard to Avon, I think that was just every community had a requirement, and there are a couple, 4 or 5 of them that I have the same question, not just about Avon, but it just didn't meet the metric. But MAPC may be able to answer that.
Avon, that's a good question that I would love to know the answer to, actually. But I can speak to the Boston issue. Boston is not governed under the same zoning act as all of the other communities. So Boston has their own separate state law that governs their development process. All of the other communities in the state are under Chapter 40A. It's the zoning act, and that's where this particular section of the new state law that requires this is. So that's why Boston is excluded. They have a different zoning enabling act.
Did you want to weigh in on Avon, or?
I did.
So I think that's a good point to end it at, since we are at 8 o'clock here. So I want to thank everybody for coming. I want to thank the panelists for a very spirited discussion. You guys jumped ahead on my notes. So actually, I appreciate that. It was a good one. So, and thank you again for everybody for coming.
All right, Ian. I wasn't trying to be rude.